Well, I pulled the starter motor off the car and went through it, and I'm glad I did. This is the original casing right here, and you can see that's all rusted and broken off there. And it's really rusted right there. So that would have generated a lot of heat. It probably would have failed. Might have cranked the motor, but it eventually would have failed. So I had another starter for a Chevrolet, but the nose cone bolt pattern was different, and also a starter solenoid on this starter motor. You can see where somebody cut the cables on this car, but that was cracked and it came apart when I took it off. And so what I did was I had to reuse the nose cone, the armature, and the end plate from the original starter, because the shaft is thicker on this starter than on the Chevrolet starter than the Pontiac starter, and the bolt pattern on this is different from the Pontiac starter. So essentially I used the windings, the field winding and the housing and the starter solenoid from this starter and the Pontiac starter. So this is from the Chevrolet starter with the windings in it, because this is all good. And you can see how the bolt pattern is different on the Pontiac starter than the Chevrolet starter. I will include that starter housing with the car when I sell it, so that they have the numbers correct. Starter. Those are the numbers on the starter. I'm sure that's the original starter on the car. That's really the only problem with the starter, it looks like, is that and this. Other than that, the starters look like it's in pretty good shape. So I'm going to bench test the starter, and if it works, I'm going to reinstall it, and then the engine should crank. I did fix the wiring on the car. This is the cable down to the battery. This is the purple wire right here that comes off this and goes down to the purple wire, attaches to there, and the battery cable to there. And when you always have 12 volts here, and when you put 12 volts there, it energizes the solenoid, moves a disc, and jumps the terminals. This is the disc that it moves. It's an electromagnet, and this is all broken. These are the terminals. That would be where the battery, and that's where the light duty 12 volt comes in, and that's kind of spring loaded, so that's usually always making contact. And then when that one hits, it jumps between this one and this one with that disc, and that's what allows the heavy current. That's your secondary side of the starter circuit. This is the primary side here. So that's just a little bit, and this is actually the starter terminal here. Sometimes they have a wire here, and that's a resistor bypass. So when you're cranking, usually you have about 9.6 volts cranking, and if you have a ballast resistor to keep your points from burning, most 4s and 6s have them, you'll have really reduced voltage to your ignition, and you won't get very good spark. So sometimes they have a wire here on 4s and 6 cylinders that will go to the coil, so when you're cranking, you're getting your full cranking current to the coil, and then when you release the key to run, you get your resisted voltage to the coil, so the points last a little longer. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad I did the starter. I'm going to bench test it. If it works, it's going in the car. This is how I bench test the starter. I just use jumper cables, one to the housing, one to that where the battery cable goes. I put my switch from the positive to the solenoid, and then I hook it to a battery, and when you pull this trigger, hopefully the starter works. And the drive comes out, so we got a good starter. So hopefully this will crank the engine. Well, the starter's in, and we're going to check see if we have spark. I dropped the starter putting it in and broke the plastic cap, so I had to go buy a new $21 solenoid. but I might have some junk solenoids at the other place that I can use the cap off of to fix this solenoid. This solenoid isn't new, it's a used one, but it's still a good solenoid, so I'll fix it when I find a good cap for it. Okay, I'm going to hook the battery cable up, and I got a remote starter on it, and we're going to see if it has spark. The key is on. And it has spark, but the starter does not release when I release the button, so I guess I'll have to pull the starter again. That brand new solenoid must be bad, but surprisingly it does have spark. So get the carburetor rebuilt and the fuel pump, and it should run. Alright, we got the starter to where when you push it and release it, the problem was this. It was made in China. Just garbage. So I used the plastic cap on the old solenoid, the old made in USA solenoid. So basically I got the wiring all done, so the car will crank with the key. And it does have sparks, and all we got to do is rebuild the carburetor, put the new fuel pump on it, and it's ready to go. And I did get I don't know if I showed this in the last video or not, I took it out and cleaned it today, but it's out of a California 1959 Cadillac, so we'll see if it fits in. It looks like it'll fit in. But the original owner is supposed to bring the original tank to me this next week, so hopefully he doesn't forget it. But if he does, I got a tank. It's clean on the inside. The fuel lines on this car are not rusted out, so I'm just going to blow some lacquer thinner through the fuel line to clean it out, blow some compressed air through it. Just replace the rubber hoses and leave the fuel line on the car. It's actually, when I scrape the undercoating off, it's still shiny silver. The brake lines, I'm going to replace everything in the brake system. But the fuel system, yeah, it doesn't need anything. And we do have good spark, as you saw earlier. So the car is ready to rebuild the carburetor and start.